we felt very strongly about building quality shelters. These are huge expenses. So we always looked for partners, particularly with international NGOs. And I think my organizational skills, along with my wife's skills, kind of fit. And we have a very strong team. It's not a big team, but it's a very strong team. But the bigger question, Damien, I think, is what about the people that have left? Because the depopulation of Ukraine has been horrific. 8 million people have moved out of the country. What's next? Okay, we can understand the war and people are afraid, and I understand that. But what's going to get these people to make the decision to come back? It's, as our motto says, homes, jobs, lives. They need a place to live, they need a job, and they need some sort, they need a life, right? And those three components are critical. But we cannot wait until the end of the war to provide these types of services, homes and rehabilitative services. And has been my dream now for the past 3 years of how do we get to the next level. And that next level is affordable housing in Ukraine.
So welcome to Talking Ukraine in English. I'm thrilled today to have our guest, John Shmorhun, who has been working in Ukraine in various capacities of management and business, I guess close to 30 years. And he's currently the chief executive officer and founder of an initiative called MoveUkraine, which provides support, housing, and infrastructure for internally displaced Ukrainians. I first met John after the Revolution of Dignity. Him and his wife organized and sponsored screenings of my documentary in Kharkiv, several screenings there, which was really a cool experience. And I know you have some ties to Kharkiv, and I'd like to get into, what those ties are and what you're doing now. But like with everyone, let's go back and start. Maybe how did you end up going to Ukraine? I know you went to the Naval Academy. Maybe that's a good place to start. And then how did you end up, going from the U.S. and coming to Ukraine?
Thanks, Damien, and thanks for having me on. Eh, well, it all started on a farm in Maryland. My father is an immigrant from Ukraine, along with my mother. I was brought up on a farm that they purchased many, many years ago. I applied to the Naval Academy and got in. I was basically, the career was a 10-year career with the Navy, where I was on ships and on aircraft carriers. I was a pilot for a number of years. And I met a lovely young Swiss Ukrainian lady named Patricia, who we got married. We got married in the U.S. while I was still in the Navy. Went to school, got my MBA in Geneva, back when International Management Institute was before it became IMD. And after receiving my degree, I joined DuPont, where we worked in Wilmington for a number of years, then moved to Geneva. And then because of my background, I was asked to move to Moscow in the early 90s, just before Ukraine became independent, where I was a manager for chemicals and pigments business. And then once Ukraine became independent, we moved with the children to Ukraine to open up the DuPont operation in Ukraine back in 1992. So I spent 20 years with DuPont, basically in Ukraine, in Wilmington, Delaware, back to Moscow, and back to Geneva. I left DuPont after 20 years to join a venture capital investment in farming in Ukraine. This farming business was quite large, it was over 110,000 hectares, close to 400,000 acres, about 10 farms, and a number of grain elevators, which I ran for 11 years. The part of the agro-generation, it was called, was divested. I left the company to consult in agriculture for a number of years. This was COVID time. And then following COVID, of course, was the war. And the war in 2022 was a big turning point for us, but for everybody, you know, in terms of the world order. My wife and I left Kiev. We moved to Western Ukraine, to Lviv. We saw a need as displaced people were leaving the east and the south and the northern parts of Ukraine. We saw a need for shelters, a place for them to live. And this was the beginning of the evolution of MoveUkraine. We created a foundation, a Ukrainian foundation called MoveUkraine, and went out to private donors. We were extremely fortunate in the donorship over, and still continue to work with private donors who believed in our cause and trusted us. So we moved to Ivano-Frankivsk, built up the team. Team consists of 12 people today, and began renovating municipal buildings as shelters for the internally displaced people. So that was the beginning, Damien. Now, we've evolved since then because displaced people and shelters, these are temporary accommodations, but in many cases, the people that moved into our shelters 3 years ago are still there, whether that's in Kalush or in Stry or in Makariv, in Kharkiv, and other places. These people have not left. Many of them have not left. And what's important in all of this is that they haven't left Ukraine.
Yeah.
A lot of them stayed because the conditions under which they were working and which we had offered them are actually quite nice. Now, these are shelters. These are basically like a student dormitory, you know, where you have the showers and the bathrooms on both sides of the building. In some of our shelters, we built like 24 of these shelters. Some of these shelters, they might have a shower and toilet there, but the kitchen is always, you know, a general kind of kitchen. And then, as things went along, we had a discussion with the mayor in Drohobych, which is in Lviv Oblast, who wanted to build an apartment building, which would be more permanent accommodations for internally displaced. And we went along, and since that time, since 2023, we have built 2 apartment buildings, each of which are 12 apartments in a building, accommodating between 50 and 60 people. 2 of those in Drohobych, a third one in Drohobych, which is not a new build, but the kind of renovation of the first floor of an existing building, which accommodates about 35 people, 9 apartments. Now we're building in Poltava, and we are probably going to build another building somewhere in central part of Ukraine. We're still deciding.
Yeah,
And then in conclusion, I would say we, by the end of this year, will have accommodated about 1,200 people, 1,200 IDPs. And then I guess to continue, because we've gone in many different directions, we were asked by the governor of Ivano-Frankivsk to help her with rehabilitation centers. And I had been thinking about these rehab centers for quite a while because the need is tremendous and it's growing. And so we started in Ivano-Frankivsk in a town called Burstin. Then we moved to a general hospital in Ternopil, then a smaller hospital in Poltava, in Dekanka, and then another general hospital in Chernivtsi, called town called Kitsman, and now in Verkhovina, in Kosiv, in Sumy, and in the um, Children's Hospital of Ivano-Frankivsk as well, a rehabilitation center. So we're moving in different directions, but we're moving with the needs. And permanent housing, these apartments we're building, that is kind of the next order of need. But the rehab centers are the crying need in Ukraine.
those are for Ukrainian military people who have been injured.
They are
Are they physical
therefore
rehab center?
anyone who comes to a general hospital, okay, and needs inpatient rehabilitation. What we're building is outpatient rehabilitation, ambulatory rehabilitation. So in most cases, it's a modular building, normally attached to the hospital, fully equipped, where now the community and those who need, whether it's people that have had stroke or veterans, anyone who has a need for ongoing rehabilitative services, whether it's physical or psychological, those ambulatory centers are for exactly that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's pretty amazing how you've grown. I remember, shortly after the war, I had been in touch with you, and I knew you guys had set up some, short-term sort of facilities in Western Ukraine. And I remember trying to even help your one of your team to find some sponsor here for laundry machines and things like this here in Germany. And there's so much bureaucracy in Germany, they don't really move very fast and that kind of stuff. But you've really grown and expanded the services and facilities you guys provide since then. Like
Yeah,
to other parts of Ukraine, I believe. Is that correct? Like you were
yeah,
not just
yeah.
Western
I
Ukraine.
mean, we're trying to move because the services are needed everywhere, and the housing is needed everywhere. But we're slowly moving to the center of Ukraine, and of course, the regions east and north of Kiev also have a high need. We're building in Sumy, in the city, uh, at a hospital rehab center, that a hospital which has an inpatient center, but they have no, they don't have the equipment nor the accommodations for an outpatient rehabilitation center. And I just wanted to say that a lot of this work we have done with partners. In terms of the buildings and the shelters, we've worked very closely with UNHCR. We've worked with Red Cross. We've worked with the International Organization for Migration. We work with Caritas. And these are the big NGOs. But we've also worked with smaller ones in Czechia, like People in Need, and in Hungary, Rokara, I think it's called. So in terms of shelters and in terms of even apartment buildings, UNHCR has been a big partner for us in terms of co-investment in these buildings. Um, in terms of rehabilitation centers, though, um, it's kind of been a one-man show. Just us with our private donors.
Mm.
Um, I have to give a shout out to the Canada-Ukraine Foundation. They have been extremely generous, and we're hoping that they will continue this year. In terms of the equipment that they've given, they've actually even given donations to build a modular facility in Verkhovina. So they're contributing the building of the modular building as well as the equipment. And then the others are basically private donors from Switzerland, from Norway, from the US, these kinds of donors. But the large NGOs, nobody has this kind of package. Somebody might contribute equipment, but nobody's building anything. And this is where the big need is in building the facility or renovating the facility so that you can put the equipment in.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I would probably say that you have all these organizations and partnerships involved because of, your reputation in Ukraine, like that you're a person who gets things done, you're a trustworthy person, you know how to get things done in Ukraine. And, like, although this wasn't the way probably you saw your personal career path, like it's your career at the same time has allowed you to do all these things and bring them into like fruition, I think. Not anyone can do this. Like you and your wife both, I know you guys work together as partners in a lot of these things. I think are kind of uniquely positioned to do this.
We've lived here for 30 years. Both my wife, Patricia, and I have managerial experience. I've worked for a corporation and in the military and in private equity. Um, yeah, I mean, we have different skill sets, my wife and I. My wife is much, I would say, very detailed oriented. She's a communication specialist. She's also a lot of back office work that needs to be done. She's also as a psychologist. So she actually goes to each of our shelters to find out how they're operating. Because remember, these shelters have IDPs, internally displaced people
So
from
are these,
different parts of
I
Ukraine.
was going to say, are these
And
all people from areas that are now occupied by Russia or close to the front line? Like where are most of these people coming from? Do you
most of them
data?
are from occupied areas. From Luhansk City, Donetsk City, Kramatorsk, um, which is not occupied yet. I don't think it's occupied.
No, it's not. It's
I have to
not. But
check.
it,
It's not.
it's close. I mean,
But
it's
it,
near.
it, it
Yeah.
it's close, but so they all ran for their lives um, and needed shelter. And everybody, most of these people have one uh, one form or another of post-traumatic stress, you know. And so my wife works with the let's say building managers who are all women in terms of the organization of the shelter, making sure that all the needs are met. But she also meets with these IDPs and speaks with them. Um, a lot of people expressed concern about what's next. How long can they live in that shelter? Um, I have to admit that the accommodations that we provided are extremely nice. And I mean, furniture that was donated to us by five-star hotels in Switzerland, okay, that were written off that we just brought in. So I mean, these shelters are extremely well furnished, and the conditions are good. But people are concerned, when will the city take this back? What is their status, ongoing status? Um, if they register in the city where they're living and they lose their status as an IDP, you know what happens to them? They lose their compensation. A lot of people are pensioners. So, these are the kind of concerns, obviously during wartime, that people are expressing, knowing that for now, during war, everything should be okay. Nobody's going to chase them out of their shelter or their apartment building. But when the war is over, what's going to happen? You know? So there are a lot of issues, and my wife, my work works with them on this and works with the local community mayor, to find out, what's in store.
Theoretically, these people could go to Europe somewhere if they wanted to, right? Like they could. So maybe a question is, why do they choose to stay in Ukraine? I guess for some, there's an allure of going to Europe, right? And just starting a new life, um, which for Ukraine is bad because these, a lot of the youth have left and are the longer they're being integrated into countries outside of Ukraine, that's young talent that's not in Ukraine. But so, these people are choosing to stay there, which I think also is important because, like for me, the longer it goes on, there's a worry like how many of these people are actually going to come back that left during the war. So why do you think these people choose to stay inside Ukraine if, I guess theoretically there's an option to go, right? Or to keep going further.
Sure. Well, a lot of them are afraid. Keep in mind, there's a lot of pensioners that stay in these shelters. Some of them stayed to the very end in their own apartments in eastern Ukraine until it was intolerable. And you've seen the pictures of these guys coming in and trying to convince the old lady to leave her house while bombs are dropping everywhere. So it was difficult enough for them to leave, uh, but they still feel the need to be close just in case. We built a shelter in a student dormitory. We did one floor where in Kharkiv, in the city. Okay. And these people, a lot of them came from Volchansk and the surrounding area, which is eastern Kharkiv, which is being bombed, Izium, which is being bombed constantly. Okay. But they are not leaving Kharkiv. They're waiting for the war to end so they can go back to their homes. Now, is it logical? I don't know. Do they need accommodations? Yes. And this is kind of not the sticking point, the point that I make about whether I build a rehab center in Sumy that's getting bombed, okay, or a shelter in Kharkiv that's getting bombed. But in both cases, there are patients that need rehabilitative services, okay, in Sumy that are not leaving, and there are people that need shelters in Kharkiv that are not leaving. So what do? I mean, I guess in some ways you need to take a bit of a risk,
Hmm.
um, keeping in mind that they're taking a risk too. So yeah. But the bigger question, Damien, I think, is what about the people that have left? Because the depopulation of Ukraine has been horrific. 8 million people have moved out of the country. Statistics that I've heard are maybe 33% will come back, 33% are undecided, and 33% aren't leaving. Okay, so that's three and a half, 3.5 million people
Yeah.
that aren't coming back for sure. And then the undecided, let's take half, let's say 50% of the people that left aren't going to come back. That's a lot of people. The question is, what's next? Okay, we can understand the war and people are afraid, and I understand that. But what's going to get these people to make the decision to come back? It's, as our motto says, homes, jobs, lives. They need a place to live, they need a job, and they need some sort, they need a life, right? And those three components are critical for those who are deciding whether or not to come back.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess I wanted to ask you, like, what motivates you to put like so much time of your time and effort into this? Because I mean, you guys could leave Ukraine if you wanted to. You could just, live your life and not be so involved and focus on your family. I know you have sons, and I mean, what motivates you to invest so much into doing all this, like personally?
Well, 30 years in Ukraine, you kind of get used to it. Um, I think it was a sense of giving back. Um, it didn't even cross my mind to leave the country, and it didn't cross my wife's mind either. We felt a strong desire to help. And all you need, and Damien, you've seen this, all you need is to see when the war started, seeing the women and their children at the railroad station in Lviv, uh, trying to understand what they're going to do next in their life, having fled the war zone, to appreciate, our feelings about giving back. So that I think that's one. And the other thing is, you know, um, the foundation, the foundation is built on kind of strong principles. And this is for me, it was, you know, uh, trying to accommodate certain needs. Because when the war started, what was happening? Food was sent to Ukraine, clothing was sent to Ukraine, um, transportation was brought in, a lot of stuff for the war. Um, but the missing pieces are where we felt ourselves. We got pulled to the missing pieces, and that was. It's not that other people weren't building shelters, but we felt very strongly about building quality shelters. And we also were very tightly uh, knit with the NGO community. So we knew what others were doing because, especially with buildings and shelters and all that, these are huge expenses. So we always looked for partners. So I would never, ever, with one exception in Ternopil, invest all of my donors' money in a particular project, in a building. Okay. It would always be working with other NGOs, particularly with international NGOs like UNHCR, United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, with UNHCR and IOM and People in Need and Rokara and others. Uh, these were the people that we worked with. So, uh, and I think my organizational skills, along with my wife's skills, kind of fit, and we have a very strong team. It's not a big team, but it's a very strong team.
Yeah, you guys also, I think, are one of the few maybe expat types who, Ukrainian-Americans who weren't based in like Lviv or Kyiv, but were active in Eastern Ukraine. I know like Kharkiv was a place you had a connection to. Um, Maybe you can talk a little about that, how your experience wasn't limited, I guess, to these sort of like main big cities, right? Like you were interacting with people from all different parts of Ukraine and doing business there, right?
Yeah, yeah. Kharkiv is a city that my wife and we lived in for 3 years during Maidan. Uh, we fell in love with that city. It's, of course, changed a lot, but we fell in love with that city. and the people there and the students, the student populations that were there. But also keep in mind that the agro-generations, um, one of our offices are in the city, or were in the city. And when we started agro-generation, which at the time was called Armelia, I actually was living in Kharkiv, and that's where our farmland was. So we got to know a lot of different small towns all over Kharkiv, all over Kharkiv. And the land, we had about 60,000 hectares in Kharkiv alone. And some of those lands were occupied and then deoccupied,
Mm.
you know. But we got to know a lot of mayors, and then of course the needs in Kharkiv with everything that's going on there are just so elevated that we decided to do two projects. One in Valky, which is west of Kharkiv, between Kharkiv and Poltava, Kharkiv city and Poltava, and the other one actually in a dormitory in the city. I think it's the pedagogical university in Kharkiv. So we've built there, and as far as we know, I mean, the shelters are absolutely full, absolutely full with people. But furniture, I mean, the accommodations are extraordinary for people.
Yeah, it's all, I mean, it's it's hard to imagine what people are living like in a city in Kharkiv, which is hit so often and affected a lot more than most Ukrainian cities like Kyiv or in Western Ukraine. I mean, Kharkiv is really like a target that for the Russians that's pretty frequent. And I think have you been there, but has changed dramatically since the war started. Have you been there?
Oh, it's yeah. Well, I've been there a bunch of times since the war started, and the governor there and the city mayor, they're busy with putting out fires, and I mean they're busy with the war. But a lot of NGOs do work there. They replace windows in apartment buildings. They provide food and water. They continue to be working there. We're not the only ones. So it's very active. And as you can see that as aid, and I think this as of when the Israeli war started, we could see that for a lot of these NGOs, the dollar started dropping for the donations in favor of what's going on in Gaza. Um, and as the war goes on and on, donations start dropping, and they have to start focusing. For example, the International Organization for Migration just closed their offices in Ivano-Frankivsk and in Chernivtsi, but they're focusing more on, eastern and northern Ukraine. So they're going where the immediate needs are.
Maybe this is a good time to just ask if someone wants to keep up with what you're doing, but what Move Ukraine you're doing, or contribute in some way to help and support you. How can they do that?
Sure. Well, it's look us up on MoveUkraine.org. Um, where the website is full of information, including the ability to donate. We have a sister organization in Switzerland called Move Ukraine Swiss. And we have a partner organization called Applied Hope Foundation in America. For those who want to donate in Canada for what we're doing with rehabilitation equipment, you can always go through the Canada-Ukraine Foundation, although we don't have other than them donating to us, there's no strict partnership, but I'm sure directed funds would go to us. We're on Facebook, Instagram, even TikTok, and LinkedIn. Please follow us. There's something going on every day. My wife is in a town called Hlobina, which is Poltava. She's opening a shelter there tomorrow at 2 o'clock, which is so she just left yesterday by train and then by car to Hlobina. On the 15th, we're opening up our rehab center in Kitsman in Chernivtsi. On the 20th, we're opening our rehab center in Ternopil City, and so on and so forth.
I mean,
Sometime in June, we'll be opening up our apartment building in Drohobych um, to much fanfare. So there's something going on all the time, and there's a lot of human interest stories that if you follow me or you follow Move Ukraine, you'll see.
yeah, it's pretty amazing all the projects you guys are taking on. Hopefully you get a break sometimes. You can like recharge.
Yeah, well, we don't get much of a break. It's a very good, actually a very good question. Yeah, we go back to Switzerland once a quarter, see our kids. I have a daughter in Miami. We'll see her. We'll see her this month, actually, the end of the month. But our activities um, actually are not limited to what I've just described. And maybe I should mention a few other things. So, and this is really the answer, I think, to the question of what about people that live outside of Ukraine? What about people that are looking for housing within Ukraine, whether they're IDPs or veterans or people that need social housing? We do have an active project in Ukraine, working as a foundation with a large builder in Switzerland that would be building what I call affordable housing in Ukraine. The details will come out probably in August. This cooperation is where Move Ukraine acts as the social component of affordable housing. So we look at that community, what social needs are needed. It can be, a kindergarten or a rehab center or something else to add to the social component, because I'm a big believer in kind of modern day communities with access, where there are jobs and where there are a place where children can be brought up. And this has been my dream now for the past 3 years of how do we get to the next level. And that next level is affordable housing in Ukraine. So for those listeners, Damien, that are interested in knowing more about that, whether they're in the business and are looking for opportunities in Ukraine, I can certainly direct them to the right people. For those interested in giving to Move Ukraine, go on to our website, moveukraine.org, and please give. The more you give, I can tell you, the more people will be able to treat in terms of rehabilitative services.
Yeah, it's tremendous work. It's tremendous work that you guys have taken on. But I'm sure it's rewarding in a lot of ways, knowing that you can have an impact in such a horrible time. It's it's crucial.
Yep, well, it is crucial, and people need to understand how crucial it is. This is, no laughing matter. I'm in Ivano-Frankivsk, which is relatively untouched. But when I travel to Kiev or Poltava or to Kharkiv, even to Lviv, these cities are getting hit, and people are getting wounded, people are getting killed. So this is war. But we cannot wait until the end of the war to provide these types of services, homes, and rehabilitative services, you know?
Yeah, it's tremendous work. It's tremendous work that you guys have taken on. Uh, but I'm sure it's rewarding in a lot of ways, knowing that you can have an impact in such a horrible time. It's it's crucial.
Yeah, well, it is crucial, and people need to understand how crucial it is. This is, no laughing matter. I'm in Ivano-Frankivsk, which is relatively untouched. But when I travel to Kiev or Poltava or to Kharkiv, even to Lviv, you know, these cities are getting hit, and people are getting wounded, people are getting killed. So this is war, but we cannot wait until the end of the war to provide these types of services, homes, and rehabilitative services, you know?
Yeah, yeah, I mean, just talking to you, I'm just reflecting on like how much, like, I mean, how black and white this situation is, and it's frustrating for me that the I guess going to back to current to politics that all of a sudden American support has shifted dramatically in the way that it has. I mean, do you have any thoughts of your own on looking at that shift or that paradigm or the alliances that Ukraine has and where things currently stand and where they're headed? I mean, anything that you might want to share from your own perspective, whether it's the minerals deal or how things feel in Ukraine, just with the people that you're talking to, because it's definitely been, from my point of view, and I guess for a lot of Ukrainian Americans, it's been kind of disturbing and big question mark on where things are headed.
Yeah, very good question, Damien. Well, the minerals deal is about as good as it can get. Okay. Yes, Ukraine has a plethora of minerals. I mean, there's no question about it. Um, while I was at DuPont, I was in the chemicals and pigments department before I moved to agriculture. But so ilmenite, which is and rutile ores are the components for titanium and titanium dioxide. Ukraine has a lot of deposits like this. And then the semi-precious or whatever they call it, minerals like lithium and these others. The question is, how long will it take for the feasibility work? How long will it actually take for these companies to come in and start mining? And how easy it will be to mine? And how much processing will actually be in Ukraine? That's where the wealth is. So this is going to take years. In the meantime, the question is how much longer this war is going to go on. Having signed the minerals deal, does that keep the Russians from shooting at Ukraine? Of course not. You know, there's no American boots, working boots on the ground, uh, refining, getting these minerals. So, there's not a case where Russia should feel intimidated by. They're intimidated from the economic standpoint. Plus, a lot of these minerals are located in occupied territory. So maybe that's the intimidation for the Russians. But, the root cause of Russia invading Ukraine for the Russians has not changed.
Right.
Okay. And the only thing that, as far as I'm concerned, that the Russian will understand is peace through strength. That's the only thing they'll understand. And because any short-term peace deals quite honestly, are just not worth the paper they're written on. It's a fool's errand to think that the Russians are going to respect any peace agreement. The only thing they'll respect is, you know, um, the ability of Ukraine to defend itself.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Ukrainians understand that too, and that's why Zelensky has a lot of support and not rushing to some sort of freezing that leaves things with question marks as to where that doesn't put Ukraine in a position that's basically capitulation for the sake of yeah, just freezing a peace process that there's no guarantee of anything, really. And other than the guarantee that Russia has broken every treaty that they've signed with Ukraine historically.
Yeah, I don't want to get into politics, but um, you know, we don't know what's next coming out of the administration, and we may be surprised. We may even be pleasantly surprised that you know um, our president Trump actually, has had enough with being pulled by the nose by Putin. Um, so we don't know. Again, for the Europeans, it's a big wake-up call, but it's getting them together is like herding cats. There's a lot of talk, and I know there's a lot of money going in. But are they unified enough to provide that counterbalance to America? We don't know.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of unknowns. What is known is what we're doing, and what we're doing is needed. Um, and I hope people who are listening um, give.
yeah, I hope so too. I hope so too. There's definitely a lot of need, but what you're doing, I think, is kind of unique. And certainly it's clear where things are going, and you know, you're a trustworthy source. So um, God bless you and the work you're doing, like for the future of Ukraine. Um, I think it's optimistic. It's just going to be a long road to get there, but thanks to people like you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, it is a long road. It is a long road, but again, when I think about the rehab centers, uh, I lived through the end of the Vietnam War. I actually joined the Navy then, and I've seen the sort of wars, whether it's Afghanistan, Iraq, that we've been through post-Vietnam, and um, veterans in the U.S. have not always been treated well. A lot of them have been forgotten. And we need to learn the lessons, the good lessons and the bad lessons from what post-war America has looked like in terms of the veterans. And we can already see when I go to the hospitals, there's so many men without legs, you know, um, how their life has changed. One of our workers here who actually uh, um, checks and supervises the work of the rehab centers in terms of how they're using the equipment that we've donated. Valik is a veteran. He was a captain in the army. He lost his leg. He walks on a prosthetic leg, and I can see, and he has been the positive. He has been he's a positive example of how veterans should be treated. He was actually treated in Switzerland, sponsored in Switzerland, and received a lot of support. And even he today is angry and has post-traumatic stress. And so you can imagine with those that have been forgotten what it's like. So these needs are increasing in numbers, and we need to be prepared because this is part of Ukrainian society now
Yeah.
that needs to be taken care of.
Yeah, there's a lot of damage that's not just, people dying and casualties, but psychological damage, families torn apart, traumatized youth, kids without parents, and yeah, I mean, it's a devastating process if you really dig into it and into the
Yeah,
reality of it. Um,
yeah, it is.
uh, and it's
We need to help these people, um, keep the families together. Veterans who have come from the war, they come with a lot of baggage, and it affects the family. And everybody needs to be part of the treatment. So this is kind of the rehab center is kind of like the hub where all of this begins. But obviously, there's so much more follow-up work that needs to be done. The Ministry of Social Policy has been building what they call resilience centers all over Ukraine. There's over 100 of them. And I've seen there's one in Ivano-Frankivsk. I've seen the one in Poltava. Beautiful centers with social workers. Now, we actually contributed to a resilience center in Haiboron, um, uh, which is Kropivnitska Oblast. And the people are just so thankful because now it's a place where families can go for social support.
mm,
So the rehab center is kind of the direct needs, but the resilience centers are the ongoing tertiary needs of a family. So it's the building blocks are there. They're being put together as we speak in anticipation of these social issues. But it's about scale,
mm.
it's about numbers. And so I would encourage a lot of university students, particularly in Ukraine, new fields are being opened up in occupational health, psychological support, rehabilitative services. Uh, um, a lot of this stuff is going to be needed going forward.
Well, looking at it up, trying to find something to be optimistic or positive about, when I look at this war, I always feel like that the society will be built back stronger than it was before. I mean, I don't know how long that's going to take, and but that people experiencing this will be rebuilding a Ukraine that generations from now will be built on a very strong foundation and hopefully where people respect and cherish each other and will be like a flourishing democracy. I mean, this is sort of maybe that sounds naive, but you sort of think that the Ukrainians are not capitulating, they're fighting, and if it's not going to happen in this generation, then it will happen in the next one. I mean that's sort of how I try to look at things, I guess, just to not focus on all the horror that's happened, that we're seeing today, but that over the long term, it'll be like a society that somehow is stronger than it was
Yeah,
during like the last 20 years, say post-Soviet sort of society, which yeah was not ideal, I guess.
no. But Ukraine has changed, Damien,
Yeah,
since
yeah.
back then. It's changed considerably. Those people that have left that will be coming back with different skill sets, um, a different outlook. I mean, it's and you see how important women have become as holding their families together, while husbands, for the most part, husbands, although women are going to war as well, but for the most part, husbands or boyfriends or whatever or sons are going off to war, women have been the really backbone of this society. I mean, women have become such a backbone in support. And the woman governor here, Svetlana Onyshchuk, I mean, that woman is working day and night, supporting the veterans, supporting the hospitals, supporting the shelters, all of this stuff. These women are nonstop, in the oblast or administration. Really, very few men, obviously, but so. Things have changed. Society is changing. It's developing. But the appreciation of freedom and what democracy is and independence is something I think Americans can learn a lot from.
Yeah, it's a bit of the irony of the situation, but that's the reality today.
Yeah, it is.
Доки всі сплять, доки сонце іще не зійшло, гине вогонь, догоряє остання лампада. Де той літак, що світанком візьме на крило і понесе? Там, де небо, тепло і зорепад. Доки всі сплять, доки тиша скрипить за вікном, холод весни заповзає в кімнату над ранням. Де той вокзал, що покличе сигнальним гудком і проведе між одвічними вперше й востаннє. Доки всі сплять, доки сон обіймає рідню в світлі вогню, ти ледь чутно виходиш з кімнати, сонце встає, йде назустріч наступному дню, а літаки паротяги чекають команди рушати.